American GI found German POW woman hiding burns. What he did next changed her life forever. April 1945. The war in Europe was drawing to a brutal close, but for Sergeant Frank Miller, a medic from a small town in Ohio, the fighting continued in the silent, desperate eyes of the liberated. Amidst the chaos of a recently secured German POW camp, a discovery would challenge everything he believed about duty, enemy, and humanity. He found her, a young German woman, her face and arms a roadmap of severe, festering burns, desperately trying to conceal her agony beneath a threadbare blanket. Military protocol screamed for him to report her, to categorize her as just another enemy combatant, to prioritize American wounded. But the raw, undeniable suffering in her eyes, the sheer vulnerability of a human being in extremis, ignited a different kind of fire within him. What Frank Miller chose to do next, defying every order and risking his entire future, would not only save her life, but irrevocably alter the course of both their destinies. It was a choice that would echo through decades, a testament to compassion in the crucible of war. April 12, 1945. The air over the Rhine Valley still carried the acrid scent of cordite and burning timber, a grim perfume that had clung to Sergeant Frank Miller's nostrils for months. He was 24, a medic from Athens, Ohio, a town nestled in the Appalachian foothills where the biggest excitement used to be Friday night football. Now, the distant rumble of artillery was his constant companion, a low, guttural growl that punctuated the silence between the screams. The spring chill bit through his thin uniform, a stark contrast to the smouldering ruins of what was once a bustling industrial town near Essen. Infrastructure was shattered, roads cratered, buildings reduced to skeletal remains against a bruised sky. The 3rd Armored Division had pushed through, leaving behind a trail of destruction and the grim task of securing the remnants. The ground beneath his worn boots was a mix of mud and pulverized concrete, each step a reminder of the war's relentless grind. The sky, a perpetual canvas of grey, seemed to weep with the land, mirroring the despair that hung heavy in the atmosphere. Frank's unit was assigned to a hastily established prisoner of war camp, a collection of dilapidated barracks surrounded by barbed wire. His job was to triage the captured, a thankless task given the overwhelming number of German soldiers and civilians swept up in the final desperate days of the Reich. Resources were stretched thinner than a worn-out bandage. Every American wounded soldier, every Allied civilian, every liberated concentration camp survivor demanded immediate attention. German POWs, by military directive, received only minimal care, enough to prevent death, but certainly not comfort. This was war, after all, and the enemy was the enemy. Frank had seen enough German atrocities, heard enough stories of friends lost to Nazi bullets and bombs, to harden his heart. His younger brother Billy had been killed in the Battle of the Bulge, a casualty of a desperate German counter-offensive. Frank carried that grief like a lead weight in his gut, a constant reminder of who the enemy was, a constant ache that made him question the very concept of mercy for those who had inflicted such pain. He moved through the crowded, muddy camp, his eyes scanning for signs of immediate collapse, his mind numb to the endless parade of defeated faces. The air inside the barracks was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, fear and despair, a suffocating mixture that clung to his uniform. Then he saw her. Tucked away in a corner of a crowded barrack, trying to blend into the shadows, was a young woman, perhaps 22 or 23. Her name, he would later learn, was Lena Schmidt. She was thin, her uniform-like dress torn, but it was her face that caught his attention, or rather what she was trying to hide. Her right arm was wrapped in what looked like a piece of burlap, but a sliver of exposed skin revealed angry, red, weeping tissue. As he approached, she flinched, pulling the makeshift covering tighter, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended the general fear of capture, a primal fear of discovery. "Let me see your arm," Frank said, his voice firm but not unkind, a practiced tone he used to calm frightened soldiers. He spoke in English, assuming she wouldn't understand, but the universal language of authority was clear. She shook her head, a silent, desperate plea, her breath catching in her throat. He knelt, gently but firmly taking her wrist. The burlap fell away, revealing the full horror. Her entire right arm, from shoulder to wrist, was a mass of third-degree burns, blistered and infected. The skin was charred in places, raw and oozing in others, a grotesque landscape of damaged flesh. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Necrosis, the sickening, sweet odor of dying tissue. And then he saw her face. The left side, from her temple down to her jawline, was similarly scarred, though less severely, a patchwork of red and pink against her pale skin. She had been trying to hide it with her hair, but the damage was undeniable. Her eyes, though terrified, held a flicker of resignation, as if she expected him to turn away in disgust, to leave her to her fate. This wasn't a battlefield wound. This was something else, something prolonged and untreated. The burns were weeks old, perhaps more, and dangerously infected. Without immediate intensive care, debridement, powerful antibiotics, sterile dressings, possibly even skin grafts, she would die, and slowly, painfully, her body succumbing to systemic infection. Frank's medic training kicked in, overriding the soldier's instinct. He knew what he was seeing. This was a life hanging by a thread, a human being in dire need. He stood up, his mind racing, the cold logic of military protocol warring with the hot surge of his Hippocratic oath. Enemy combatant, minimal care. He could report her, send her to the general POW medical tent where she'd get a cursory glance, maybe some iodine, and then be left to her fate. That was the procedure. That was his duty. He had every reason to follow it. The Germans had killed his brother. They had bombed cities, gassed millions. Why should he care about one of them? The faces of his fallen comrades flashed before his eyes, their sacrifice demanding retribution, not mercy. He walked to the camp's makeshift medical station, a tent overflowing with American wounded, the air thick with groans and the metallic tang of blood. Sergeant Johnson, the grizzled head medic, looked up, his face etched with exhaustion, his uniform stained with the day's grim work. "What's up, Miller? Another one with a cough?" "Sergeant, I've got a German woman, severe third-degree burns, infected, needs immediate attention, debridement, antibiotics, dressings. It's life-threatening." Frank's voice was tight with urgency, a plea disguised as a report. Johnson didn't even look up from bandaging a GI's shrapnel wound, his movements practiced and weary. "Miller, you know the drill. POWs get basic first aid. We're swamped. We've got our own boys bleeding out. She's enemy. Put her on the list for general processing. If she makes it to a proper hospital, fine. If not, well, that's war. We don't have the resources, son. Not for them." "But, Sergeant, these are third degree. They're weeks old. She's got sepsis setting in. She'll die." Frank's voice was a desperate whisper now, the words tasting like ash. Johnson finally looked at him, his eyes hard, devoid of the usual camaraderie. "And how many of our boys died because of them? How many civilians? You think we got a surplus of penicillin for the people who started this mess? We're here to win a war, Miller, not run a charity for the enemy. Get back to your post. Don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment. This isn't Athens, Ohio. This is Germany, and they're the enemy." Frank walked away, the words echoing in his ears. Sentimentality. He had seen enough death to be numb, but this was different. This wasn't a clean kill on the battlefield. This was a slow, agonizing demise that he, as a medic, could prevent. The image of Lena's terrified eyes, her desperate attempt to hide her wounds, burned into his mind. He thought of his mother, a kind, gentle woman who believed in helping anyone in need, regardless of who they were. A woman who had taught him that true strength lay in compassion. He thought of the values instilled in him in Athens, Ohio. Fairness, compassion, the inherent worth of every human life. These were American values, weren't they? Values that transcended the uniform, the nationality, the hatred of war. Values that spoke of a higher moral ground, a belief that even in the darkest hours humanity must prevail. He had lost Billy. He hated the Germans for it. He felt the bitterness, the anger, the desire for vengeance. But did that mean he should stand by and watch a young woman die a preventable death? A woman who was clearly not a soldier, whose wounds spoke of a different kind of suffering, a civilian caught in the maelstrom. The military protocol was clear, rigid, and utterly devoid of mercy in this specific instance. But his conscience, that small, insistent voice that had guided him his whole life, screamed louder. He was a medic. His oath was to save lives, not to judge who deserved to live or die based on their uniform or nationality. He remembered his drill sergeant's words during basic training. An American soldier always does the right thing, even when no one is watching. This felt like that moment. He walked back to the barrack, his decision hardening with every step, a quiet resolve settling deep in his bones. He would treat her. He would find a way. He didn't know how or what the consequences would be, but he knew he couldn't let her die. He would risk court-martial. He would risk everything he had worked for, his future, his reputation, because to do otherwise would be to lose a piece of himself, a piece of what he believed America stood for. He would act against orders, against the prevailing sentiment, against the very logic of war. He would choose humanity. He would choose compassion. He would choose to save Lena Schmidt, even if it meant becoming an enemy of the system he served. The weight of this choice was immense, but the alternative, the image of her dying slowly, was unbearable. He would begin tonight, under the cover of darkness, a clandestine operation of mercy. The brutal reality of Frank's decision hit him with the first chill of the German night. He had chosen to act, but the how remained a terrifying void. His makeshift medical station was a partially bombed-out building on the camp's periphery, its roof a sieve for the cold spring air, its windows shattered. He had scavenged a few planks to create a rudimentary cot, and a single flickering lantern provided meager light, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to mock his clandestine efforts. The biggest challenge was supplies. The official medical tent was under lock and key, guarded by Sergeant Johnson and his watchful eye, a fortress of desperately needed resources. Frank worked his regular 18-hour shifts, treating American wounded, his exhaustion a constant dull ache that permeated his bones. Then, under the cloak of darkness, his real work began, a secret life lived in the shadows. He became a ghost, moving through the camp after curfew, his footsteps muffled by the rubble and mud. He'd salvage supplies from abandoned buildings, often finding only rusted instruments and expired medications, a testament to the war's destructive efficiency. The real prize was the official medical tent. He developed a system. During his day shifts, he'd subtly misplace bandages, claim certain medications were lost in transit or contaminated during a transfer. He'd report penicillin vials as broken, gauze rolls as unusable. Each item was a calculated risk, a small act of deception that chipped away at his integrity but fueled his mission. He knew the supply sergeant, a gruff man named Henderson, was meticulous, a stickler for inventory. Any significant discrepancy would raise alarms, and Frank knew his time was limited. He felt the constant pressure of discovery, a cold dread that settled in his stomach. Lena, meanwhile, was a silent, terrified patient. He would bring her to the makeshift clinic after dark, guiding her through the rubble-strewn paths, her small hand trembling in his. The language barrier was immense, a wall between them. He knew only a few basic German phrases, mostly commands he'd picked up from interrogations. She spoke broken English, learned in school before the war, but fear often rendered her mute. Her initial terror of him, of any American soldier, was palpable. She flinched at his touch, her eyes darting, expecting pain or cruelty, a lifetime of propaganda and recent trauma etched into her demeanor. He tried to reassure her with gestures, with a gentle tone, with the careful, almost reverent way he cleaned her wounds, a silent promise of care. He improvised. Without proper debridement tools, he used a sterilized razor blade and his own steady hands, painstakingly removing necrotic tissue, his stomach churning at the sight and smell. He fashioned dressings from scavenged linens, sterilizing them over a small hidden fire, the smoke a constant worry. The primitive antibiotics he managed to acquire were barely effective, but they were all he had, a desperate gamble against overwhelming infection. The cold German spring was a relentless enemy. The unheated building made her shiver uncontrollably, risking hypothermia. He found an old, torn blanket, barely enough to cover her, and wrapped her in it, hoping the meager warmth would suffice. The risk of infection in such unsanitary conditions was constant, a silent killer lurking in every shadow. Every night he fought against the odds, against the clock, against his own mounting fatigue. He'd often fall asleep for an hour or two on the cold floor beside her, only to wake with a jolt, his mind racing with the next step, the next challenge. The constant fear of discovery, of a patrol stumbling upon them, gnawed at him. One night, as he was struggling to redress a particularly difficult burn, his hands shaking from exhaustion, a shadow fell across the doorway. His heart leaped into his throat, a drumbeat of pure panic. Discovery. Court-martial. He spun around, ready to face the music, his meager tools clattering to the floor. It was Nurse Eleanor Vance, a stern-faced woman from Boston, assigned to the American wounded. She had lost her brother in the London Blitz, a victim of German bombing, and her face usually held a grim, unyielding resolve. She stood there, arms crossed, her gaze sweeping from Lena, huddled on the cot, to Frank, then to the meager supplies scattered around. "Miller," she said, her voice low and dangerous, cutting through the silence. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Frank braced himself, his shoulders tensing. "Saving a life, Nurse Vance." He met her gaze, refusing to back down. She stared at him, her expression unreadable, a complex mix of anger and something else he couldn't quite decipher. "She's German." The word was spat out, laced with years of pain and resentment. "She's a human being with third-degree burns," Frank countered, his voice firm, unwavering. "And she'll die without help. We can't just let her." Eleanor walked closer, her eyes narrowing as she examined Lena's wounds, her professional eye assessing the damage. "Those are bad, real bad. You're using penicillin, aren't you? And those bandages, those were reported as contaminated from the last supply drop." Her voice was accusatory, but her fingers, as she gently touched Lena's arm, were surprisingly soft. Frank didn't deny it. "I'm doing what I have to do. There was no other choice." Eleanor sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the war. "My brother died because of them, Miller. I have every reason to let her rot, to see her suffer." She paused, then looked at Lena, who was watching them with wide, fearful eyes, understanding enough of the tone to know she was the subject of a grave discussion. "But I'm a nurse, and you're a medic. It's what we do, isn't it? We save lives, even when it hurts." She knelt beside Lena, her movements surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to her usual brusque manner. "What's your name, Fräulein?" Lena, startled by the unexpected kindness, whispered, "Lena. Lena Schmidt." Eleanor nodded, a flicker of something akin to empathy in her eyes. "I'm Eleanor, and we're going to help you." She turned to Frank, her voice still firm, but now with a hint of collaboration. "You're doing this all wrong, Miller. You need proper sterile technique and more antibiotics. I know where Johnson keeps the good stuff, the fresh shipments, and I know how to make them disappear without Henderson noticing." With Eleanor's help, the situation improved marginally, but significantly. She brought better supplies, taught him more advanced burn care techniques, and even helped him learn a few more German phrases to communicate with Lena, bridging the linguistic gap. Lena, in turn, slowly began to trust them. Her initial terror gave way to confusion, then a hesitant gratitude that shone in her eyes. One night, as Eleanor was changing her dressings, Lena, in her broken English, began to speak, her voice weak but clear. She wasn't a soldier. She was a civilian nurse, conscripted by the Wehrmacht to work in a military hospital in Dresden. She had been burned during the Allied bombing of Dresden, trying to rescue patients, both German and Allied, from the burning building. She had been trapped, her arm and face catching fire as the hospital collapsed around her. She had survived barely, only to be captured and left to die. Frank listened, a knot forming in his stomach. She had been saving lives, just like him, when she was burned. The enemy propaganda she had been fed, portraying Americans as brutal, heartless invaders, began to crumble in the face of their kindness, replaced by a fragile hope. His own exhaustion was profound. He was losing weight, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, his body aching from lack of sleep. Letters from his fiancée, Sarah, back in Ohio, went unanswered for days, or received only terse, distracted replies. He couldn't explain what he was doing, couldn't tell her about the German woman he was risking everything for. The strain was immense, but the sight of Lena's burns slowly healing, the infection receding, kept him going. The situation remained precarious, but for the first time he saw a flicker of hope in Lena's eyes, a reflection of the hope he desperately clung to himself, a testament to the power of human connection across the chasm of war. The clandestine operation, born of desperation and compassion, began to yield tangible results. Lena's burns, though still horrific, were no longer life-threatening. The infection had receded, and new, fragile skin was beginning to form, a testament to Frank's tireless efforts. She was stronger, able to sit up, even walk short distances with assistance, her eyes holding less terror and more nascent hope. But this very success became its own complication. Other POWs in the general camp remained in poor health, their wounds festering, their spirits broken by defeat and neglect. The stark contrast in Lena's condition, her gradual improvement, began to draw unwanted attention. Whispers started, hushed conversations among the guards and other medics, questions about favoritism or illicit dealings. How was the German woman, the one with the terrible burns, getting better when others were not? Sergeant Henderson, the meticulous supply sergeant, noticed the discrepancies first. Small amounts of penicillin, gauze, and antiseptic solution were consistently missing from his inventory, always reported as lost or contaminated by Frank, or more recently, Eleanor. Henderson was a man of regulations, a former accountant whose world was built on precise numbers and accountability. He didn't believe in coincidences. Every missing item was a personal affront. He began to keep a closer eye on Frank Miller, noting his late-night movements, his increasing exhaustion, the way his eyes seemed to hold a secret, a burden he carried alone. Then Captain Thomas Sterling entered the picture. Sterling was a West Point graduate, sharp, ambitious, and utterly devoted to military doctrine. He saw the war in black and white, enemy and ally, duty and dereliction, with no room for moral grey areas. He had heard the whispers, seen the reports of missing supplies, and observed Miller's secretive behavior. He believed Miller was either stealing for the black market, a common problem in the chaos of post-war Germany, or worse, fraternizing inappropriately with an enemy POW. Fraternization was a serious offense, treasonous in its implications, a betrayal of everything they fought for. Sterling initiated a quiet, thorough investigation. He reviewed supply logs, interviewed guards, and even discreetly questioned other medics about Miller's activities. The evidence, circumstantial but mounting, pointed to a clear pattern. Witnesses had seen Miller entering the bombed-out building at night. The woman's dramatically improved condition was undeniable, a glaring anomaly. The confrontation came on a cold, grey morning. Frank was finishing his shift, his body aching, his mind already planning the night's treatment. Captain Sterling, flanked by 2 military police, approached him. "Sergeant Miller, you're relieved of duty. You're to come with me." The words were clipped, authoritative, leaving no room for argument. Frank knew this moment was inevitable. He didn't resist, his shoulders slumping slightly in resignation. He was led to a temporary office, a commandeered German schoolroom, its walls still adorned with faded maps. Sterling sat opposite him, his face grim, his posture rigid. "Sergeant, I have reason to believe you've been diverting military supplies for unauthorized purposes, specifically for the treatment of an enemy combatant. Furthermore, you've been operating a clandestine medical facility in direct violation of standing orders regarding POW treatment and fraternization. Do you deny these charges?" Frank looked Sterling directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering despite the fear churning in his gut. "No, sir, I do not deny them." Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised by the frank admission. He had expected denial, obfuscation. "You understand the gravity of these accusations, Sergeant. Theft of military property, insubordination, potentially treasonous fraternization. This could mean a court-martial, a dishonorable discharge, and a long stretch in Leavenworth." "Yes, sir, I understand." Frank's voice was steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "But I couldn't let her die, sir. She had severe burns, infected. She would have died a slow, agonizing death. It was a moral imperative." "She's the enemy, Miller!" Sterling slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing in the small room. "Our boys are dying, and you're risking your career, risking our limited resources for a German. What kind of American are you, Sergeant?" His voice was laced with incredulity and anger. "We're Americans, sir," Frank replied, his voice gaining strength. A quiet conviction filling the room, a testament to the values he held dear. "We don't let people die when we can save them. Not when we have the means. That's what makes us different. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it? Humanity. Compassion, even for those we're fighting. We're better than that, sir." The room was silent, the weight of Frank's words hanging heavy. Sterling stared at him, his rigid worldview momentarily shaken by the unexpected moral challenge. Just then, Eleanor Vance walked in, her face set with determination. "Captain Sterling, I believe I can shed some light on this situation. I was involved." She then recounted her involvement, admitting to helping Frank, explaining her own moral dilemma and how she ultimately chose to assist, despite her personal losses. "It's what we do, sir. We save lives. It's our oath." Sterling listened, his expression unreadable, his mind clearly wrestling with the conflicting narratives. Then, a guard brought Lena into the room. She was still frail, her scarred face a testament to her ordeal, but her eyes held a newfound strength, a quiet dignity. Eleanor had explained the situation to her in German, preparing her. Lena, in her still broken English, began to speak, her voice soft but clear, resonating with truth. "I was nurse in Dresden, hospital, Allied bombs, many wounded, German, American. I try to save. I give American POWs extra food, bandages. I hide them from SS. I burn trying to save them from fire. I am not soldier. I am nurse. Like him. Like her." She gestured to Frank and Eleanor. "He saved me, like I tried to save them." The revelation hung in the air, a powerful counterpoint to Sterling's rigid doctrine. Lena had saved American POWs. She wasn't just an enemy civilian. She was someone who had already chosen humanity over nationality, risking her own life for Allied soldiers. Sterling's face softened, the rigid lines of his military doctrine momentarily blurring, replaced by a flicker of understanding. The situation was transformed. He had a choice: uphold the letter of the law, court-martial Miller, and potentially expose a story that would be a public relations nightmare, or acknowledge the moral imperative that had driven Frank. Other soldiers, those who had heard the whispers and now saw Lena's improved state, were divided. Some nodded in quiet approval, others muttered about misplaced loyalty. He looked at Frank, then at Eleanor, then at Lena, a profound internal struggle playing out on his face. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken implications. Finally Sterling spoke, his voice low, a grudging respect in his tone. "Sergeant Miller, Nurse Vance, your actions, while technically in violation of military regulations, appear to have been driven by extraordinary circumstances and a profound sense of moral duty. Furthermore, the testimony of Fräulein Schmidt presents a compelling case for her prior actions in aiding Allied personnel. He paused, then continued, "I will not be filing charges for theft or fraternization. However, Sergeant Miller, your unauthorized activities have created a complication. You will be transferred, effective immediately, to a different unit, far from this camp. Nurse Vance, you will remain here, but I expect strict adherence to protocol from this point forward." Frank felt a wave of relief, followed by a pang of regret. He had saved Lena, but at the cost of his current assignment and a potential black mark on his record. Yet, as he looked at Lena, a faint, grateful smile on her scarred face, he knew he had made the right choice. The officer, though rigid, had ultimately chosen a path of pragmatic understanding, acknowledging the complex reality of war and the enduring power of human compassion, a quiet victory for conscience over blind adherence to rules. Weeks later, the war in Europe officially ended. Lena Schmidt, her burns healed, but her scars a permanent testament to her ordeal, was processed through proper POW channels. Her testimony regarding her actions in Dresden, corroborated by Eleanor Vance, ensured she was treated with a degree of respect, though her repatriation to a devastated Germany was still a harsh reality. She returned to a homeland in ruins, a landscape of rubble and despair, but she carried with her the memory of two Americans who had chosen kindness over hatred, a fragile seed of hope in a desolate world. Years passed. The 1950s saw Germany slowly rebuilding, and Lena Schmidt, despite her physical and emotional scars, dedicated herself to nursing once more. The kindness of Frank and Eleanor had rekindled her faith in humanity, inspiring her to help others regardless of their nationality or past. She worked in a small hospital in a rebuilt Dresden, her scarred face a silent testament to resilience, a living monument to the power of compassion. She never forgot the American medic. Through the nascent International Red Cross, she began a painstaking search, writing letters, hoping against hope to find him. Finally, in 1958, a reply came. A letter from Athens, Ohio, bridging the vast distance and years. Their correspondence began tentatively, then blossomed into a deep, abiding friendship. Lena explained how his compassion had given her the strength to rebuild her life, how it had shown her that even in the darkest moments, humanity could triumph over hatred and despair. She told him how his actions had inspired her to dedicate her life to helping others, to be a beacon of hope in a shattered world, a living embodiment of his quiet courage. In the 1960s, Lena, now married to a German doctor and with 2 children, received an invitation to speak at a medical conference in New York. It was her chance to finally meet Frank again. He too was married to Sarah and had 3 children, living a quiet, fulfilling life in Athens. Their reunion was emotional, a silent acknowledgement of the profound bond forged in secrecy and defiance. There were tears, shared memories, and a deep, mutual respect that transcended their different lives and backgrounds. Lena met Sarah, who, though never fully understanding the details, had always sensed the profound impact of the war on Frank, and welcomed Lena with warmth. Lena revealed the full impact of Frank's choice. Inspired by his actions, she had co-founded a medical charity in Germany, initially focused on helping war victims, regardless of their former allegiance. Over the decades, it expanded, becoming a global organization dedicated to providing medical aid in conflict zones, a testament to the belief that healing transcends borders and politics. "Your courage, Frank," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "It didn't just save my life, it saved thousands. It gave me a purpose beyond survival." Their story remained a private testament to their shared humanity for decades. It wasn't until the late 1990s that an American historian, Dr. Evelyn Reed, researching the treatment of POWs during World War II, stumbled upon declassified military records. Among them was Captain Sterling's report on Sergeant Miller, marked "No Action Recommended," but with a detailed account of the incident and a crucial addendum about Lena Schmidt's testimony. Intrigued, Dr. Reed tracked down the now elderly Frank Miller in Athens, Ohio. He was initially reluctant to speak, the memories still raw, the fear of past repercussions lingering. But eventually he agreed. Dr. Reed then found Lena Schmidt, still active with her charity in Germany, and brought their narratives together. Their combined interviews, published in a groundbreaking book, brought their story to light. It became an example of moral courage, of humanity transcending the brutal logic of war. The book detailed how Lena's charity, Heilung ohne Grenzen, Healing Without Borders, had helped over 10,000 war victims across multiple conflicts, from the Balkans to Rwanda. It highlighted how Frank's choice to risk everything for an enemy combatant had inspired medical ethics discussions in military academies, challenging future leaders to consider the moral dimensions of their duty, not just the tactical. Their friendship lasted until Frank's death in 2003. Lena, frail but resolute, traveled to Athens, Ohio for his funeral. She stood before his grieving family, his grandchildren gathered around her. "Your grandfather taught me that being American means something," she told them, her voice clear despite her age. "It means believing every life has value, even your enemies. He healed my body, but more importantly, he healed my soul, and through that, he helped me heal the world." If this story of courage and compassion moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our community exploring the untold stories of World War II. What would you have done in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. These stories of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things deserve to be remembered. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our next incredible true story from the greatest generation.